Oh, shoot, I forgot I have headphones on still. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of GoJo and Golic. Jason Fitz going to be popping in for Dad today on a busy Wednesday, so let's get to it. Jimmy Butler and the NBA rumor mill keep on churning. Could a new team emerge for the soon-to-be former Heat superstar and former Bears offensive lineman Kyle Long going to stop by, chop it up about their offseason changes, what to expect from the Super Bowl, and a good helping of quality beef. And changes on the way. Jessica Smetana going to join us to talk some of the changes already afoot in the world of college football, including for our beloved Notre Dame Fighting Irish. All that and more starting right now. What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Jason Fitz, kind enough to fill in with us this morning for Dad right now. Getting some stuff ready to go for his shoulder replacement that Dad's got coming up here. The Bionic Man going to be joining us. You can catch Jason Fitz over at Yahoo Sports, inside coverage, the College Football Power Hour, and more great programming over there. We got a great show for you guys. As always, download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network, which includes our YouTube channel. Make sure you go check that out. We are live there now. You can hit the little bell, find out when we're coming up there. As mentioned, Kyle Long, who in addition to playing for the Chicago Bears, also spent some time at the end of his career with the Kansas City Chiefs. Familiarity with Matt Nagy, is seen inside the belly of the Chiefs beasts, and so can give us some of that institutional knowledge of how they continue to find these ways to reinvent themselves and get back to the stage. Jessica Smetana from the Dan Le Batard Show, Gen CFB, can help us kind of look out and prognosticate the college football offseason already that every year is more and more mimicking its NFL counterpart. And Jason, we've got some questions that we want to ask for eliminated playoff teams as well. But how you doing, buddy? Good morning. Thanks for filling in.
Man, I'm so good. Like, I don't know why you needed to bring in more beef. I mean, bringing in Long is great, but like you already had me next year. Like this is a lot of beefcake we got going on this morning. I feel like I was bringing enough size, but it's fine. You want to bring somebody big? It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. I'll mask in the beef glory that will be the two of you talking fat boys.
See Jason now as a reformed member of the physical health community. I see him posting pictures of himself shirtless and flexing. You're new money when it comes to muscle, Jason.
Oh, yeah.
Kyle Long is old money when it comes to this. I remember coming out, me and Kyle are the same age coming out of high school, and I remember still back then seeing this guy that was one of the top offensive line prospects in the country also just deciding he was going to go play college baseball originally because he was a 6'7", 280-pound lefty who threw gas off the mound. And when I met him finally for the first time years later, when we were out in Chicago at the same time, when he was playing for the Bears and I was working out trying to play for somebody, I remember walking away and at that point realizing I was probably destined to go pro in something other than sports because he was the biggest person I had ever met. Felt like meeting an actual bear. I said he always embodied the name of his team better than any player that I had ever seen. So you're just the new money version of that, Jason. You've been around it relatively less time, but you still have, a lot of oomph and chutzpah if you don't have a lot of size.
No, you're right. Like I walk into the gym and you can tell the difference between old money and new money. I'm now going to steal that the next time I'm in the gym because like the guy that's been there before doesn't need any of the extra bells and whistles. I'm the guy that's always trying to get into the hydro massaging chair after I do it and just exhausted from my leg day that is a fraction of the weight that real men put up. Like I get it. Yep. I get the new money analogy. That's fine. Life's fine. But you know what? I'm in the neighborhood and I'm annoying everybody at this point. So let's go. Come on.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, even still bringing Smetty on the show, like I'm sure she might be able to outdo you too. So, you know what? You're on the medal stand, at least, of the people coming on to GoJo and Golic today to help us out here. So you could take some solace in that right now. Old money, new money, I don't care what it is here. Jimmy Butler, let's talk about what we have going on here before we get to some of the NFL news of the day, because as the world turns, Jimmy Butler and this Miami Heat saga that is now on its third suspension of this season, this time for walking out of practice after being told that he would not be in the starting lineup for the Miami Heat in an upcoming game. He's suspended indefinitely, and it's got everyone revamping and re-asking the questions in the lead up to the NBA trade deadline in February 6th. Although Brian Windhorst, ESPN NBA insider, pointed out that all of this may actually be having the desired effect, if you're Jimmy Butler, of depressing the market a little bit and allowing more teams to come to the table. Here was Windy yesterday.
Yeah, so the Heat are really, really trying to make this happen. And I know that you could have said that anytime in the last 4 or 5 weeks, but in talking to people who are involved in these talks, I think the Heat's prices have come down. What they're willing to accept in trade has widened. And I think that's going to bring some more teams that were previously sitting on the sideline to the table.
Yeah, Fitz. Now, hearing this is interesting because the Miami Heat during this cycle have seemed like a no-nonsense outfit. Hey, we're not going to tolerate all of this huffing and puffing on the side of the court. We're going to suspend you and get you away from our team that is still 6th place in the East, still trying to vie for something this season potentially without him. But then the message on the other side, if this is true, and Brian Windhorst is a credible insider who people believe when he says things, if this is true, the message is also being said, if you throw enough of a fit, we'll give you what you want, which is an expanded view of teams that might take you. Because as Jimmy Butler said or intimated during the beginning of this process, he feels like he can go anywhere and make it work because that's just in his history. So if you're a team out there, Jason, and all of a sudden this market is expanding for Jimmy Butler, how interested are you in this guy?
I mean, okay, look, at some point you realize if you're good enough at what you do, you're going to get a chance to play somewhere. That's unfortunately the way the world works. But Mike, I think the part of this at some point, and this is what I've been screaming as long as we've been working together, man. Like at some point, the problem is it's hard to put the toothpaste back into the tube. And I am a fan of player empowerment in every possible way, but you reach a point, and the NBA reached this years ago, where players sign deals and then, minutes later come in and decide they want to play somewhere else. It's been Jimmy Butler's MO everywhere he's ever played. So at some point, somebody in the NBA is going to have to stand up to one player one time and say, nah, it's just not going to happen this way. I realize that it's asking a lot for Miami to fall on the sword, but somebody, just like we always say, it takes one player, it takes one team that's going to turn around and say, nope, man, I'm just not going to let this happen this way. And I don't remember a time, what is this? Like, I'll use an 80s wrestling analogy. This is very Macho Man. Like in the 80s, Randy Macho Man Savage was a bad guy until he was a good guy, then he was a bad guy. And all you knew is you cared about him. Whether you loved him or you hated, you cared about him constantly. He shifted all the time. Jimmy Butler, just a couple of years ago, we were working together on shows, sitting here saying, oh my God, is there a player that personifies his organization more than Jimmy Butler? And now Jimmy wants out. And that same organization is sort of being backbent into making that wish come true. I personally, as a fan of the sport, I wish that there would finally be a moment, and this would be it, that Miami would stand up and say, you know what? You don't have to play, but you ain't playing somewhere else. I don't care anymore. Like I want to see one team stand up and say, we are going to stop the nonsense of constant, you don't want to play here, so we'll figure out a way to benefit you. Or trade him to the worst possible place that's hell on earth for him. Like send a message at some point that, hey, you want out, we'll send you somewhere, but we're not going to make you happier, because you can't just constantly act like a spoiled child every time you decide that you don't like your situation anymore so that you can go get a new situation.
Yeah, and Fitz, that's asking a lot because the sideshow that Jimmy Butler has created right now has dominated all of this. Like, I'm with you in that the name and the reputation of everyone involved far outpaces what I believe is the actual basketball effect that any of this is going to have. Like, I don't think a team, especially the ones that we've heard talked about, Phoenix Suns have been the team named in the middle of this most often. Jimmy Butler going over there doesn't fix the problems of that old roster that doesn't have rim protection and has struggled in all these other areas. And so now, you hear this, Kevin O'Connor said the other day that the Golden State Warriors might be the team involved in this, which is baffling to me because Steph Curry just a little while ago said, hey, we don't need to go swinging at the trade deadline if it's not there. Like, we don't need to force something right now. We're not a good enough team to go and put the foot down on the gas pedal in that same way. This one, though, Jason, really, again, underscores just how past its prime I think this entire deal around Jimmy Butler is when you've got Vinny Goodwill talking about the Philadelphia 76ers.
It would be a Jimmy for Paul George swap. I believe, I've heard this, that Joel Embiid, who still loves Jimmy Butler, is pushing for them to reacquire Jimmy Butler, knowing that Jimmy is out there. But here's the other side of that, Jay Adonde. Paul George was told by management or ownership, we wouldn't trade you year one of this deal. So there are so many different iterations. I'm not saying that Joel Embiid is pushing for Paul George to be traded. I'm saying that Joel Embiid is pushing for them to acquire his buddy, Jimmy Butler.
All of this coming on the night that Joel Embiid, as the 76ers got a win against the Los Angeles Lakers, but in the process, watch Joel Embiid miss his 400th career game. According to SpotTrack, he's been active for 446 games in 10 and a half seasons. So Fitz, at almost a 50% clip, he's been missing games. And yet the reunion with Jimmy Butler, who was a teammate that we thought really worked well with Joel Embiid back in the day, all of a sudden something tantalizing enough to him to break up the new version of the super team that they just formed that most people thought is going to struggle to work because of all the injury history there. So you see what I mean? Like, 5 years ago, this would have been exciting. As I sit here right now, I struggle to see how this makes any of these teams better demonstrably in this way this year coming off the trade deadline. I know there's some salary cap shenanigans that can go on, bringing Jimmy Butler on. He's got the player option that he could trigger next year. All these different things that could be advantageous to a team that does apply for him. But in terms of actual basketball benefit, I struggle to see it this season.
Yeah, it isn't there. And I just love the concept of my 50-50 superstar that may or may not play in any of these games, God only knows, is now sitting here saying you got to bring Jimmy Butler back. Like, and Philly fans, who we've had plenty of things to say about with the Eagles for sure, Philly fans being the warm, fuzzy, lovable people they are, I'm sure they would give him just a great greeting when they introduced Jimmy Butler in the starting lineup the first time. Like, this is just a weird fit. But Mike, the other part of this, too, is according to multiple reports, come on, Jimmy Butler, what he's really concerned about here is he wants more money, not right now, but he wants more money in portions of this deal that are 3 years out. So, like, okay, so not only are you acquiring Jimmy Butler, but you're going to have to figure out financially how to make him happier than Miami is making him right now. Like, that's just another. So you want me to buy talent that, like, to be very clear, you are not buying this car straight off the lot. You are not buying brand new, oh my God, I just got a Lamborghini. You're buying a Lamborghini from a while back that has been really good, but boy, it's been used the hell up. Like, a lot of people have owned this Lamborghini and there've been good times and bad times with it. And now you're buying it, but you want me to now pay current market price for a new one. Like, all of these things don't add up. This isn't Jimmy Butler of years ago, and this won't be the marriage. Like, you're essentially overpaying for the basic attempt to remain relevant. Jimmy Butler's name is more relevant than his basketball will be, and the team that picks him up will only be relevant because they're involving themselves in this soap opera, not because it suddenly makes them a championship caliber team. Do any of us truly believe that Jimmy Butler is going to go somewhere where he's hoisting the Larry O.B. at the end of the year? The answer to that is no. So all of this is just drama from mid-level basketball.
This is a testament to what postseason success can do to people, because the whole story about Jimmy Butler and the legend since he's come over to Miami is playoff Jimmy. Regular season Jimmy at times has been disappointing even for the Miami Heat. But this idea that once he finds his joy again, the line Jimmy Butler used at the beginning of this series of suspensions, once he finds that joy, can you capture just enough for this time of year? It's everyone prorating for the postseason in the NBA, which we talked about, comes at the expense of the regular season, but is the reality with this. The other reality with this entire process, as everyone has pointed out too, is this is the scorpion and the frog, right? Jimmy Butler doing to the Miami Heat what he's done to literally everyone else, even though the Heat, because of the Heat culture and because of Pat Riley, thought they might be special. No. When Jimmy Butler wants to hit the button, Jimmy Butler will always hit the button. It is James Harden-esque, but in a very different way, because Jimmy gets all of the, associations with hard work and being a leader and being a guy that's this edgy competitor, while James Harden sort of goes oppo after the whole fat suit thing. I think people think of him differently, even though caliber of player-wise, he's been markedly better. So it's a whole bunch of things that come together at once. The real interesting part about this, Jason, is we've got this going on with Jimmy Butler, who is 35 years old, who is certainly past his prime as a player in most people's estimation. And yesterday, we get actual interesting news that drops here, that apparently the Sacramento Kings are open to hearing trade talks about De'Aaron Fox, who is, 27 years old. And listen, we know the Kings, since the Light the Beam era a couple of years ago, have not quite been the same team that captivated everybody. But De'Aaron Fox feels more like a guy, especially with some of the rumored teams. Now, I've seen a bunch of reports here. I think it was James Hahn who said that, according to multiple sources, if he leaves the Kings via trade, his preferred destination would be the San Antonio Spurs, which would be very interesting. Pair him with Victor Wembanyama, as they're still outside of the playoff picture. But one of the other ones that a lot of people have been making the connection with was, hey, man, this got to be the Houston Rockets, right? You're sitting there at second in the West. You've been a team where your young parts have come together famously. You're riding off the high of that win over the Boston Celtics the other night. You go out there and add a piece like this, and now all of a sudden really start to bolster yourself for a team, Jason, that maybe like Oklahoma City has had this young core come together maybe a little bit sooner than expected and give them some juice going down the stretch of the season. This one actually feels interesting to me.
Yeah, this one not only feels interesting, but it feels like it's a win-win for everybody involved, right? Like if Houston could go out and acquire De'Aaron Fox, what they acquire is somebody that they can rely on, right? They acquire that person that, hey, we need a bucket, we got a bucket. And I think getting that going into the playoffs would make a ton of sense for a young team that is a little ahead of schedule for where we all thought they would be. And it's a win for De'Aaron Fox. Like if you're coming out of Sacramento to go somewhere, do you really want to go all the way back to the beginning of a rebuild? And I know the Spurs have Victor Wembanyama, and that's a huge draw for everybody, but they haven't been a good basketball team yet, right? So go somewhere where you've got a bunch of young guys that are enjoying playing the game right now. They're having a blast doing it on a team that is surprising, I think, for some people where they are in the standings. Man, that's a win-win. Win for the player, win for Houston. Sacramento will get enough back in return that it's a win for them, I believe. So, yeah, and Sacramento's not turning around right now looking at their opportunity to win a championship either. I don't think so. That move makes a ton of sense. And by the way, because you're getting young value, I have no problem. That's the sort of player you overpay for. You're getting somebody that you've got several years left to go in this league and try and make an impact. So, yeah, that's a home run move.
Yeah, I mean, and this is another place, too. Some people wondered about the viability of a Jimmy Butler. De'Aaron Fox, I believe, was college teammates with Bam Adebayo, if I'm not mistaken. So you can get some of that stuff mixed in there. But again, Jason, this is interesting to me twofold. One, like you mentioned, the Houston Rockets and being a young upstart team. The other one is, as we go forward now, Victor Wembanyama, we've always talked about what kind of a draw does he create in a place like Sacramento that you normally don't think of as this hub attracting a lot of free agents. Now, all of a sudden, would his presence there be enough for people to say, hey, I see what can be down there. Let me go in and get it on the ground floor. Obviously, you've got all of the historical trappings of that organization as, Greg Popovich continues his recovery, but in general, what that place has been. It'll be interesting to see how much more of this we get going forward of players that all of a sudden view San Antonio as a destination because Victor's there.
Yeah, well, and San Antonio needs that too. If we're being honest with the world for a second, if Victor Wembanyama, as many had hoped in that moment, had been drafted by a team by the Knicks, having the lack of success around him that they had in the first couple of years while he continues to develop into a dominant player is something that the Stephen A's of the world would be losing their minds. They'd be having aneurysms every day trying to figure out how to make more out of it. So I think there is growing pressure on San Antonio to figure out how to draw talent and how to draw the most out of this opportunity, because you cannot waste transcendent talent in the NBA, and that's what Victor clearly is.
De'Aaron Fox versus Jimmy Butler is the eat this, not that of the NBA trade deadline. Coming up next, we'll take a look at some questions for eliminated NFL teams and ask another question. Does anyone want to coach the New Orleans Saints? Back after this. It's GoJo Golic. We will get to some questions for eliminated NFL playoff teams here. Spoiler alert, did a podcast with Mina Kimes, the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, that will drop tomorrow, where we've talked about some of those questions and going to filter a little bit of that over here as we more focus on one big question for a lot of the teams eliminated this offseason. But Fitzy, one big question on the mind of NFL fans everywhere right now is, who the hell wants to coach the Saints? Because as we sit here with them as the last available job in the NFL's offseason and get the news that Cliff Kingsbury is taking himself out of the contention and the running for the Saints head coaching job, Mike McCarthy is going to step back and focus on the 2026 hiring cycle, and round we go. Fitz, it certainly seems like Kellen Moore, who interviewed for the job and is still in the playoffs with the Philadelphia Eagles, going to have to wait till after the Super Bowl for all this, seems like the last remaining dance partner. But if you're him, Fitz, knowing what the Saints are right now, a team that's sort of caught in the middle ground on quarterback, a roster that's imperfect and coming off a year where they were banged up at a ton of important spots, and sitting in a cap hell the likes of which few teams have ever known here, what part of this seems appealing to you for your first bite at the apple as a head coach?
Yeah, to your point, 1 of 32, and maybe Kellen Moore has a better opinion on Derek Carr than the rest of us do. So, but I think what this really tells us, Mike, is that the NFL head coaching hiring process is broken. The only thing, because what happens here is, to your point, they want to talk to Kellen Moore. Well, if you're Cliff Kingsbury or you're Mike McCarthy, you don't want to sit around and wait for that to happen. Now, if you're the Saints, because you want to wait for a coordinator that's in the Super Bowl, you may have lost other candidates you could have pounced on earlier and been aggressive with. So this is why I continually say that, to me, the NFL needs to change their entire head coaching cycle hiring and change the date of it. Frankly, I don't think they should even allow coaches to be interviewed by anybody until the day after the Super Bowl. And you shouldn't be able to hire somebody for a week after the Super Bowl. Move the entire calendar back so that everybody's hiring their coaches at the same time. I keep thinking about Spags and Kellen Moore, viable candidates that, it becomes incredibly difficult to take the chance to hire. And if you wait for one of them, as the Saints may have done in this situation, and then they decide you're not a good fit, well, now you're absolutely, what do you do? At this point, you're looking around and saying, well, we waited at the altar all this time to talk to Kellen Moore. If he's not interested in the Saints job, their plan B at this point is going to have to be an absolute reach. I think in order to protect the coaches that are still coaching and give the teams the opportunity to make the best decision, they should push the entire hiring schedule back, force all of us to wait, and then actually have the viable candidates interview in a time frame that makes more sense. Because the Saints, I think, are screwed.
I understand the thought process to an extent, Fitz, in that you want to give the candidates the best possibility without also interfering with what's going on. Interviewing for a ton of jobs while you're also trying to prepare for postseason games, as a lot of these coaches are, is a tall task. And we get the headlines every year of people questioning their attention and if they were focused on the task at hand, especially if teams lose, which, by the way, we should point out, a bunch of the candidates you just mentioned on teams that have won a whole bunch of games. But the other side of it is, I do think it rewards teams that have a better process and understanding of themselves. And if you're the New Orleans Saints, you should have understood that, yes, while you weren't going to be the first choice, that sitting around and hoping and waiting wasn't going to benefit you a ton, given the fact that you were a very flawed job. And so I think identifying candidates that you have a realistic likelihood of landing is important, because right now, if I'm Kellen Moore, this Eagles offense isn't going anywhere. Like, I don't think there's reason to believe that all of a sudden that offense would take a massive step back next year. Now, I understand we need only look so far as Bobby Slowick and the Houston Texans to watch how something good can sour quickly if you're not careful. But at the same time, and I think this is sort of the thought process for Cliff Kingsbury too, is, hey, I'm on a team that's got a bunch of talent. In Cliff's case, I've got a great young quarterback. Why am I going to go down here on what in Kellen Moore's case could be my first shot, and Cliff's case could be my last best shot at being a head coach in the NFL, and leave that in the hands of a franchise that right now is paying off one credit card with another? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, they're going to end up hiring like John Gruden or somebody at this rate, someone who is desperate enough to take any job that's one of 32 to get back into this, because the Saints have very little to offer anyone right now.
I also think we have to point out here that New Orleans fired Dennis Allen so early in the season. They had even more time, to your point, to figure out who they were,
right,
to talk to search firms, to talk to all of the people that help you make these decisions, to Backroads in and talk to some of the agents. They had all the time in the world. Frankly, they could have almost immediately talked to somebody like Belichick, should they have chosen to, right? They could have started reaching out to coaches that weren't under contract long before anybody else, because they fired somebody in the season, and they didn't. And now they're sitting here, to your point, maybe Gruden back with Derek Carr. Maybe that's something that he's comfortable with. Maybe that's something the Saints are comfortable with. But, man, you're already having to tell your fans, we're going to rip this thing apart. We're probably going to set this whole thing back to a reset from square one because of the salary cap situation, because of what they're locked into with Derek Carr. They're probably at a restart situation anyway. And now, by the way, you're probably not getting your first, second, third candidate to do that reset. Like, that's a nightmare scenario of just, okay, we'll take this guy and we'll sit at a press conference and try and convince you this was the plan all along.
Yeah, I mean, God, the Raiders not in a great spot, as you can attest to here. Don't even have the quarterback that the Saints can offer you, in a much harder division to win than the Saints are. And they managed to go and coax Pete Carroll out of retirement to come over here and hang out with Marshawn Lynch at press conferences. So I don't know, man. Like you said, given when the Saints fired Dennis Allen, this is a really flawed process that right now is bearing that fruit of that flawed process. Speaking of a process, though, let's take a look to Fitz, at some of the eliminated teams. We got a bunch of teams that got sent home in the playoffs, as we now are on the 2-week march to Super Bowl 59. we've got a bunch of teams that were sent home in the playoffs that are going to have big questions to ask. And so we thought we'd take a look this week at some of them there. There's a great article on .com. I mentioned you can hear a bunch of thoughts on the Mina Kimes show tomorrow with this. But, Jason, we'll look at the wild card teams that got eliminated today. And I want to start with the NFC. So you look at the teams eliminated in the wild card round there, the Vikings, Packers, and Buccaneers, and ask what the big question is for each of these teams. Or really, I'll give you all of them, Fitz, and ask, what do you think the most important question facing any of these teams is this offseason?
That's really good. I do think that the Vikings, not to make everything about quarterbacks, because it's more than that. I think the Vikings have to figure out quickly what their plan of attack is. If I am Minnesota at the quarterback position, particularly, I don't care about the salary cap ramifications. I can move money around. I am franchising Sam Darnold. Like, I'm not letting him get out the building because I don't know. JJ McCarthy's had 2 procedures on his knee. Everybody internally has seen him. They have a better idea, but if last year was supposed to be a learning year for JJ McCarthy, you can make the argument he didn't really get the opportunity to learn the way that they wanted him to. And if there are any setbacks, do you really want to step back? We got to remember that this is a team that last year was putting people in a quarterback that we didn't even remember was in the NFL. So, like, I think having somebody like Sam Darnold, even though it was flawed the last 2 games of the season, I think that's really fair. I don't care. I got a quarterback on a rookie contract. I'll treat the quarterback position as one overall dollar amount. I will franchise Sam Darnold, and I'll make sure that I still have my plan in the building. But they got to figure that out right away, because if they're going to try and do something with them, even if they don't want to keep him, I would still franchise him and try and manufacture a sign and trade. So I think they've got to be aggressive with teams to figure out what it looks like right now.
Yeah, because Fitz, I do think a lot of that is dictated by 2 things. It is what you mentioned, the health of J.J. McCarthy behind the scenes and how comfortable the Vikings are. We know he was a guy that was pushing for the starting job by the end of training camp last year before the injury happens and all of a sudden their season changes. But now he is a first-year player that did not get to develop there, that spent most of his time rehabbing, might still have that built into this offseason. Only they know that part. The other part is, what's the market going to look like? Because I do think he only makes sense for them at a certain price if they were going to try and lock that down for longer. To your point, the franchise tag is an option, but I do wonder, given the quarterback marketplace that we know is about to exist this offseason, how desperate a team would get. Like, again, we've mentioned your Raiders a couple of times, but Fitz, is Sam Darnold a guy that you would try and pry out of there if you could, in the name of giving the Raiders someone to hang their hat on, as opposed to trying to move up in a draft with flawed quarterback prospects to go and get one of the 2 players that we maybe associate with that position this year?
Yeah, I will loudly plant the flag again. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think that there's a single answer long-term in this year's draft at the quarterback position. I just don't. I think there's a much better chance in this year's draft of getting a Zach Wilson than there is of getting any of the guys that we've seen, than getting a Jaden Daniels, for example. So I don't think the answer is there in the draft. Now, as a team, you're going to have to look at it and say, okay, well, I got to have somebody. Supply and demand. I mean, Sam Darnold, compared to the rest of what's available at the quarterback position, is like the Dan Marino of this class. And I understand that Sam Darnold and Dan Marino don't usually belong in the same sentence. I'm just saying that there is it's scraps. There's nothing out there. So yes, I think there will be a bidding war for Sam Darnold. If he hits the open market, I expect everybody that needs a quarterback to say, hey, Sam Darnold, sure. Like, are we really going to say Sam Darnold versus Aiden O'Connell? Like, that's even a question? Yes. Like, Pete Carroll's going to look at it and say, okay, I'll take Sam. And even if you're drafting a quarterback in the 3rd, 4th round and you're taking that flyer, still having Sam is going to help you for the next couple of years. Yeah, I think teams will be desperately flocking to get a pretty good quarterback. Like, it's going to be like, you are the prettiest girl that Paducah, Kentucky's ever seen. That's all I'm saying. Like, Sam Darnold's going to be coming in, and it's like the prettiest girl they've ever seen.
I do think that it's an interesting bit of calculus for Sam, too, to leave the nest of a place that has gotten the best ball out of you. Clearly, what Kevin O'Connell and this roster affords you is different than what a lot of these places acquiring you would be doing. And Sam Darnold knows that better than anybody. But I do think this quarterback marketplace is desperate enough to where someone might give him in the neighborhood of the Daniel Jones contract, the Baker Mayfield contract, all these things that we see bantered around. And already I can see. I know Daniel Jones is on the roster there, but God, how funny would it be for the jersey edits of Kirk Cousins coming back home to Minnesota, the remnants of Kirk Cousins on a much cheaper deal after a failed year where now we know Michael Penix is going to be the guy in Atlanta going forward. So that is, I think, the biggest question that hangs over the NFC wildcard eliminated teams. I think the other ones, Fitz, you look and stay in the AFC North for the Packers. Is it really time for a wide receiver one? I know Matt LaFleur sort of rebuffed that notion when he was asked about it during the postseason run. Is it time for a bucket getter there? For the Buccaneers, they just keep interviewing Rams assistants. I saw they interviewed the Rams tight end coach, quarterback coach, passing game coordinator. It's like, hey, if you like Liam Cohen, we got more of this for you here to try and eliminate, or I should say, hold over that side of the ball and get the best out of Baker Mayfield. Fitz, which of those two teams would you be comfortable betting is back in the postseason next year between the Bucs and the Packers?
The Bucs, because they have a flawed division. And here's what's interesting to me, Mike. Dave Canales, when he left, we were like, wow, he fixed Baker. And then Liam Cohen comes in, and maybe we're starting to realize that, yes, all these coaches deserve credit, but Baker has become a coach job getter, right? Like Baker's out here elevating the coaches that work with him, which is stunning. And I talked to Baker last year at the Super Bowl for a good amount of time. And when I kept asking him what was different in Tampa Bay, he stressed to me that it was the first time that he ever felt in his entire career that there wasn't this weird pressure. Maybe because it was coming off of Brady and nobody really thought that he could do it. He's just, for once, it wasn't Baker come in and be a franchise saver. And Baker, first overall pick, he didn't feel any of that. It was just like, well, Baker, better than nothing. And that allowed him just to wipe away the pressure and just be himself. Well, we saw that carry over under Liam Cohen. So I think what's interesting is coaches should be coveting that job. I would want to work with Baker right now because the last two guys that worked with him ended up as the head coach in the NFL. Baker, far better than he's getting credit for being at this point. And Tampa Bay in a very winnable division. I just think the Buccaneers need to look at themselves hard in the mirror and figure out what they're going to do, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, to put themselves into the upper echelon. They're going to be able to win their division year in and year out. But if they want to be able to compete with the absolute best of the best in the NFC, they need to do a little bit of work on their offensive line, and they need to figure out how to be better defensively.
Well, I think the offensive line is set, quite honestly. Like, I think Luke Gedeke might be up for a contract, which they should be. Yeah, he's got contract stuff, but they've drafted well at that position. Tristan Wirfs is a stalwart at that spot. On and on down the list there. Bucky Irvin was a hit in the draft. You might lose Chris Godwin this offseason, which would be interesting, but I'm with you. The questions lie with Todd Bowles and the defense of what they are going to do to remedy the situation, as Todd Bowles, I think, walks into 2025 on the hot seat as the coach there. So you're right, though, about Baker Mayfield and the coordinator, because Baker also has displayed an aptitude for coming in and digesting someone's new stuff. Dave Canales and Liam Cohen were miles apart in terms of what they wanted to do offensively and schematically. And Baker Mayfield has worked with 6 coordinators in the last 5 seasons. So if anyone is shown, hey, I can come in and absorb what you're trying to have us do and then spit it back out in a way that looks really nice and gets us all paid and gets you a job, it has certainly been him. So that's some of the questions facing the NFC wildcard losers. We will look at the AFC coming up in the next hour. But coming up next, let's hand off our grown college sons to the NFL. It's hand measurement season. Jessica Smetana from the Dan Levitard Show going to join us next on GoJo Golic. Welcome back to GoJo Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Jason Fitz filling in for Dad today. And we are joined now by Jessica Smetana. You see her over on the Dan Le Batard Show, one of the co-hosts of Gen CFB over there during the fall. And Jess, I'm wondering if you are as excited as I am now, because every year as people that, all three of us major in college football in a lot of ways and get to hand our large adult sons off in the spring towards the NFL process here. Are you guys excited for hand measurement season to be here? I saw yesterday Mike Giardi on Twitter, Jalen Milroe's hands measured in at 8 3/4 inches, and people freaking out right now already, especially after we're fresh off a playoff game where Josh Allen absolutely vacuumed a ball off the ground with his. So, Smetty, are you in here for all of the combine nonsense that we get now?
I'm definitely here for it. And I'm also here for every video of our former large adult son, Riley Leonard, at the Senior Bowl. Mike, I don't know if you were watching those clips yesterday, but oh, man, I miss him so much already.
By the way, y'all, can we just, the hand thing, I have tiny hands. I have the world's smallest hands on an adult male. I know that my hands are so small that when I was playing the violin as a kid, my teachers were like, your hands are small. It was an issue to play the violin. My hands are so small. I cannot imagine sitting here and having somebody measure the hands and they'd be like, well, that's the reason this quarterback is or isn't going to work. This is the maddening part. And yes, in some cases, I realize there's value to it, but let's be honest here. The amount of time we're going to spend just focusing on things that, just watch the tape. Just watch what these guys did on film. It's just missed me with some of this conversation about how long somebody's pinky is. I'm out on it.
Hey, I talked myself into a quarterback with small hands not too long ago. Wouldn't do it again. But now he's in the Super Bowl.
God, the Kenny Pickett era in Pittsburgh. Who can forget? Capture the magic. I will say in the small hands department, that stuff does kind of matter. I remember, I played center for some of my career, and we get to a really bad rainy day. And I remember spots in practice where I'm slopping it out there. You got no gloves on because it's so slick. And I literally just had to cup my hand under the ball and try and push it back because my hand was not big enough to go and grip it in that way in the rain. So that stuff does kind of matter a little bit. It's not the be all end all, but either way, it's perfect dumb fodder for right now in the offseason. Although, Jess, you and I haven't had the chance to debrief about this on air as college football is now into its offseason. We have seen plenty of the movement already among different staffs. Jim Knowles, the former defensive coordinator for Ohio State, it looks like taking his talents to Penn State there to replace Tom Allen, who went down to Clemson to be closer to family. And you've got all this movement around here that is also unique for the teams that have gone further into the championship dance. And this year, that includes the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who lost Al Golden to the NFL. He takes the Bengals defensive coordinator job. Jim Bowden, the GM for Notre Dame, I forget what his title was there, but is going for the same role at USC now to take that job. A lot of change for a team that was in the national championship just this last year, Jess. So how are we feeling about the state of the Irish coming off this 2024 season?
Yeah, so Chad Bowden leaving for USC, obviously a pretty big, Jim's his dad, so you were not far off. He didn't name his son Mike, get really creative, name his son the same name as his name, like some dads, lazy dads around here, who are also not working today. But yeah, I think from the vantage point of a Notre Dame fan, you might be panicking right now. Al Golden's gone. The defense was so good under him. Chad Bowden's gone. He's obviously been really integral to a lot of the personnel movements and decisions at Notre Dame over the past few years. But it's really impossible to not take this Notre Dame staff and Marcus Freeman seriously after they just made a pretty significant title run. So I think if you have any trust in the infrastructure of the football program, they'll probably try to make some good hires here. Obviously, we'll see who ends up as the new defensive coordinator. They looked like they were really interested in Jim Knowles, but he ultimately ended up at Penn State, like you said, which indicates Notre Dame wants to spend some money. They've got money. They want to spend money. This is a university that gilds its administration building in gold. So I'm curious to see who fills those two positions. Obviously, you kind of want to figure it out soon because spring ball is eventually going to start. This is a sort of important recruiting period, although all periods are important recruiting periods now. But it's when you have a really successful season, other teams want the people that helped you get there. So I think it's a mark of some great hires by Notre Dame, and it's possible that if they wanted to match Bowden's offer from USC, they could have. I've seen a lot of reporters on the beat say that. So I think that that's all very interesting. It'll be interesting to see who replaces him.
That's an important part of this conversation, even with Jim Knowles going to Penn State. Like, if they want to match, like, these programs can print the money if they want to. If they want to keep somebody, they can keep somebody. Even losing Al Golden to the NFL, like, at this point, college defensive coordinators can be paid the same as NFL defensive coordinators, right? Like, is there some concern in anybody's, either of you guys, from the Notre Dame standpoint? Why change any? You just went to a national championship. Why allow change to happen if it's just a dollars for dollars business?
Well, I think Al Golden really wanted that Cincinnati job. Like, that's home for him. He said that in his introductory press conference. Like, I'm not sure if he would have taken like the Chargers defensive coordinator job. Maybe. It's still the NFL, even if you're, making the same amount of money. Coaches ultimately view that as like, there's only 32 NFL teams. If you have a coordinator or head coaching role on one of those teams, it's still professional football. So I understand that, but I do think Cincinnati was really special to him and somewhere that he had coached previously and felt like it was, the one job that he would leave Notre Dame for, possibly. So I think that, like, yeah, Notre Dame could have probably tried to keep him, but he was ultimately going to take that. And I personally feel like an idiot because I was rooting against the Bengals all season and laughing at how bad their defense was, and really I just played myself. But yeah, as far as like Chad Bowden goes, it's that one, maybe Notre Dame sees the 3 times the salary raise and the fact that, he's going out to LA. He's a young guy. If he has any professional aspirations, which I'm sure he does, I don't know him personally. It's a good place to be. There's a lot of professional sports teams out there. It's a good place to network. And, like, there's a lot of work to be done at USC. I think this is a huge, huge win for USC. Lincoln Riley's been getting a ton of criticism for his recruitment out of Southern California and the schools there. And I think Chad is someone that has done really well in that region and will continue to do well now. So I think it's a huge get for USC. But yeah, I'm curious why Notre Dame didn't match it or whatever. Maybe they just figured he, looked for new jobs last year, so he was going to leave anyways. And so there's no point, or maybe they feel like they can replace him. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but this is a common thing in all sports, right? You have a good staff, you have a good group of people, other people are going to want to hire them. And I think it's like up to you as a program to prove that you can continue to just fill those spots and reload.
Two things come to mind hearing all of this. The first is what you just mentioned, Jess, is this is one of the problems that comes with being an elite team. Notre Dame spent the last month going out here and publicly showing off its program on these huge stages. And so everyone else who was sitting at home had time to look and see what they liked. Al Golden did have a reunion, not only with a place that he knew, but a place that's got Joe Burrow. Like, you've got one of the quarterback super weapons. And so you feel like at this ultimate level of competition, you have a chance. This was the thing that Brian Kelly, I always said, south of Nick Saban, no one did a better job of replacing coordinators on a consistent basis than Brian Kelly did in South Bend. Marcus Freeman already did that last year, right? Getting Mike Denbrock to come back from LSU to South Bend to fill the offensive coordinator role worked out really well for Notre Dame. And so now they're going to have to do that at defensive coordinator in a job that's become one of the glamour positions when you look at all of the different people that have gone through that role and gone on to head coaching jobs, one of them in Marcus Freeman, who's done so at Notre Dame. It makes a lot of sense. And so he's already got good headway in that. There's a lot of appeal for Notre Dame and this roster to be able to go and recruit there. The other part of this is interesting, though, is we are now getting to a day and age where the GM in college is becoming just as noteworthy as the GM in the NFL fits in terms of how we go and talk about this sport. And I wonder just in general how you think college football fans are going to respond to that. In the NFL, we're used to, hey, going through this offseason hiring cycle here, in what order do you hire the GM and the coach? Who has a say in picking what here? And now in college, really, I think once we got the headline about Alabama signing their GM to this monster deal this season and the way how publicly that was reported, now we've gotten to a point where I feel like fans are going to start to know the name of their GM in college just as readily as they do in the NFL.
Which raises the question of who becomes the face of every program. Because for so long, fans and their ire always went straight to the coaches. But if we're going to get to a situation where GMs in college football sort of run the roost like they do and like they're starting to, then yes, absolutely. Fans are going to have to figure out where they're setting their pitchforks first, right? And that's a much different dynamic from the college football landscape. It's also interesting to me because I would love for fans to keep the same energy for front office executives and defensive coordinators that go from rival to rival as they do for players to go from rival to rival. Like to have a GM go from Notre Dame to USC, or to have a defensive coordinator go from Ohio State to Penn State. Like this is new modern college football. Like fans need to accept the fact that where they're going to send their anger to is interesting, but also these coaches can just flop from one place to the next. It is very NFL-like in that sense.
Oh, trust me, fans,
Jess,
they have plenty of ire to go around. Yeah, they're not reserving ire. I've seen the Jim Knowles message board comments.
Oh, the ire mines are full and robust and full of product for everyone here. The Jim Knowles situation is interesting with Ohio State, and there's a lot of stuff, being bantered about what went on, the pull and tug for power there. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. They won the national championship, and everything else that happens after that, I'm sure everyone there in an honest moment would trade, albeit national championships a little more frequent there than a place like Notre Dame, where I've already talked about I would, lop off a testicle on air for that if it need be, but we don't have to go back and relitigate that. Jess, what I want to ask is, Ohio State last year was this team that we saw almost from the immediate end of the season go and start loading up. You had a bunch of guys defect from the NFL draft and come back to Ohio State saying they had unfinished business. Chip Kelly becomes this monster signing for them in the offseason at offensive coordinator to signal, oh, wow, they're really loading up now. Penn State has kind of become that team this offseason. Notre Dame, we just saw that team up close and personal. Drew Aller says he's coming back. You had a bunch of defensive players coming back south of Abdul Carter that were still incredibly talented. You add Jim Knowles on that side of the football now to replace Tom Allen. Are you buying them as the Ohio State of 2025? Or are you like me and still have a lot of questions about people buying into Drew Aller at the level they seem to be?
Yeah, certainly the last game we saw Penn State play didn't give you a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings about the quarterback, and especially the wide receiver situation. But when you look at this far ahead of the season, projecting who's going to be a good team or a bad team, you obviously look at who's coming back, what key positions are coming back, and who the coordinators and the coaches are. And for my money, Penn State has a very good set of coordinators and a very good head coach. So yeah, I would say they're definitely going to be good next year. Their schedules in the conference is a little trickier than it was this year. But I think they're going to be great. And I think it's crazy to, have a team in the semifinal with that much talent returning and not be like, yeah, they're still going to be pretty good. It's hard to get to the semifinal. I know that a lot of people want to knock the SMU Boise State path that they had to take, but I'm with you. I think they're going to be very good next season. And I think Jim Knowles just adds to that.
Also, guys, we got the coincidence or a trend. Back-to-back years of Big Ten champion, fine. Back-to-back years of a coach that entered the year on the wildest of hottest seats. Like, oh, if he doesn't get it this year, this guy's going to be fired. Like, we forgot that with Harbaugh, and we've certainly forgotten that now with Ryan Day. I mean, James Franklin's kind of next man up, right? Like, they're passing the baton of pressure to him next, because it certainly seems like Penn State fans are only getting more and more frustrated. So maybe we should just start looking at every year at the beginning and saying which coach is just being dumped on the most by his fans of he stinks if he doesn't win a national championship. If James Franklin wins it this year, then now we've got a new trend that we should book that moving forward.
If you want to stay in the Big Ten, Lincoln Riley, I think, would be a good bet too. That is a coach that their fan base is very down on, and I still feel gross saying Big Ten when I'm talking about them. But they've tried to make some big moves in this offseason, re-signing their defensive coordinator, who did a really good job last year, and now obviously bringing in Notre Dame's GM. So that may be another team where, I don't know, I'm still kind of in I'll believe it when I see it mode with Lincoln Riley, because it's been such a disaster. But if you want to go off just the hot seat to national championship path, people are not very happy with him there.
All of this just goes back to Big Ten's going to be the Thunderdome again next year. And hopefully more of those good teams play each other during the regular season than this last year, where we had to all kind of watch them bounce off intermittently here. You guys check out Jessica Smetana, the Dan Le Batard Show, all over the DraftKings Network and everywhere else you get your podcast. Jess, appreciate the time. Thanks, bud.
Bye.
Bye, Jess.
Coming up next, we get Kyle Long in here and Heisman odds for 2025. You betcha. Speaking of college football, the 2025 Heisman Trophy odds went up on DraftKings this week. So time for a little cash it or trash it. Cash it or trash it is presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. No surprise, Arch Manning, who many expect to take over the starting job in Texas with the departure of Quinn Ewers, leads at plus 700 in the odds here, followed by Garrett Nussmeier, Drew Allen, and Cade Klubnik, rounding out the players that we feel like we know. Julian Sayin, expected to be the incumbent at Ohio State, fifth in the odds. But don't look now. Lenora Sellers plus 2,200. DJ Lagway plus 2,500. Finally getting the reins at Florida. Maybe a little Steve Angeli plus 5,000. Maybe getting to take over the reins in South Bend. We'll be back with Kyle Long next year on GoJo and Golic. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr. here with Jason Fitz filling in for Pops. Hour number 2 of the show. Thank you to Jessica Smetana for stopping by from the Dan Lebitard show in the last hour. Certainly a ton of fun, but as we talked about off the top of the show, Fitz, while you have been on your health and fitness journey here, you are acquired new money when it comes to the muscle game here. We got to bring in the old money for hour number 2 here. A man who has been about that life for a good long time here. Former Chicago Bears first rounder, offensive line star, and our Campbell's Chunky Offensive Lineman of the Week here, presented by Campbell's Chunky Soup that eats like a meal. Kyle Long, kind enough to join us here today. Kyle, I figured I saw you guys over at CBS been doing the Offensive Lineman of the Year stuff, so I figured I'd welcome you the only way we know how.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's been a long time since I've been introduced as an offensive lineman. It's, like expert analysis or picks with the pros. But you know what? I'm just an O lineman. So it's nice to hear that in conjunction with a good Campbell's Chunky promo because, we were our foundation was rooted in Campbell's Chunky Soup at our house. A lot of that.
Yeah, by the way, let's just get clear right away. If there's one can of Campbell's Chunky Soup and the three of us are in the room, I don't even feel good taking a spoonful. Like like the little guy doesn't even get the Chunky Soup. He has to pass the Chunky Soup to the big guys that have earned the Chunky Soup. I haven't earned the Chunky Soup.
Well, you got to show off your intelligence a little bit. Got to find a way to outsmart the big guys, Fitz, and that's really what it comes down to. My younger brother Howie Jr. He's the youngest of three boys. He's about 6 foot, $185, but I'll tell you what, he is smarter than any of us, and he always found a way to get it in where he fit in. So, shout out to the guys who are not as huge as offensive linemen because they can make it happen too.
Let's go. Let's go.
Exactly. It takes everyone here. And what a perfect segue into looking ahead a little bit at the Super Bowl that we got coming up, Kyle, because we know on both sides of this, teams defined by beef and Eagles offensive line with some of the biggest guys I've ever seen toting Saquon Barkley, who may be the most important player on that team, and a Chiefs team that you also have a ton of familiarity with, having been a part of that organization and gotten to see on the inside. I'm curious for you, Kyle, where you're at on the excitement for this matchup. I know a lot of people have Chiefs fatigue. A lot of people maybe not thrilled to get the rematch from a couple of years ago. What do you see when you see Super Bowl 59, Chiefs and Eagles getting ready to reload for us?
Well, as somebody who's obviously going to be rooting for my buddies along the offensive line in Kansas City, I've got friends in Philadelphia as well because of the crossover that Chris had in Philly with the Super Bowl championship there. And obviously, I came out in 13 with Lane Johnson, so I'm a huge fan of his game. You talk about Chiefs fatigue. I'll be honest, I got Eagles fatigue, and nobody wants to see the Philadelphia Eagles just because of how talented that roster is, by the fact that they brought in Saquon Barkley, an otherworldly running back who, in my opinion, is above and beyond the best at his position in the National Football League. It's like Patrick Mahomes, Saquon Barkley at the running back position, Chris Jones along the defensive line, and there's a few other guys in that list. Lane Johnson will be one of them. So much star power on that Eagles roster. And you just go back and take a look at the first play, 60 yards, Saquon Barkley, but the first 12 yards he was untouched. And yes, I know he made a bunch of guys miss, and he shed off a bunch of tacklers like me running through the playroom with my 2 under 2 daughters and just pushing them off onto the ground with ease. But let's not miss the point that this offensive line has been to the top of the mountain before with other players outside of Saquon Barkley. So you add him in. It is as scary a task as any, because if you do elect to put 8 guys in the box, Saquon still hits home runs. If they want to go in a different direction offensively, Jalen Hurts has proven that he can throw the football. A.J. Brown can be the guy that you rely on. And obviously Goddard, been around a long time. Devontae Smith, no slouch either. So on the offensive side of the ball only, it's scary enough. There's more than enough stuff to have nightmares as a guy who's going to be rooting for the Chiefs.
All right. So everybody has nightmares about the Chiefs in one-score games because they just don't lose them, right? Yeah. 17 straight, 12-0 this year, one-score games. Mahomes has never had the ball in his hands in the last 3 minutes, needing a score of a playoff game and not gotten the score. So if you're Philly, how do you manage all of that mental pressure?
You got to kidnap Patrick Mahomes before the game. Put him in a bunker. Put him down there way under the ocean with Godzilla and whatever ship is housing all those UFOs that are coming over New Jersey. Just put him out there somewhere. Just don't let him get to the stadium. No, in all seriousness, I just think that having a tremendous rush plan and being concretely committed to the fact that you're not going to let Patrick Mahomes get out of the pocket, because as we know, come playoff time, Patrick becomes a true dual threat at the quarterback position. And, Mike, you and I watched the first 15 of that AFC Championship game, and it's bing, bang, boom down the field. It is like scientifically executed with laser-like precision. But then in those big moments where we need 6 yards, we need 8 yards, we need a first down, we need a touchdown, Patrick is more apt to run the football in the playoffs. And you give him this extra week off between the championship weekend and the Super Bowl, and he becomes that much more dangerous. But I think if you are going to make your job a little bit less difficult, it's going to involve trying to contain rush Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, certainly that chess match between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Vic Fangio on the other side with what's been a sensational Philadelphia defense. Going to be fun to watch in that regard. You mentioned, though, Patrick Mahomes and the way he changes to fit the moment in the postseason, the way that we've seen this team sort of change to fit the personnel they've got year to year. You were inside the belly of the beast. You got to see this operation up close and personal. What is it about this organization and the way they do business that allows them to adjust the way that we see them do each and every year and all of a sudden wind up as the last team standing every time?
Well, I think it obviously starts with Patrick Mahomes, and every single guy in that locker room has an understanding and a true belief that with Patrick, anything is possible. With and through Patrick, anything is possible. And I mean, you go down the roster, every single one of these guys is elevated in terms of their prep. They're in the training room earlier. They're in the weight room on days where it's optional. They're working after practice for just that opportunity to maybe catch a pass from number 15, maybe be involved in one of these highlights that'll be on a loop in Canton one day. I think that's first and foremost the most important part. They've got a true to life superhero at the quarterback position, and it's what every team in the league wants. And then you go one step higher, and it's Andy Heck at the offensive line coach, run game coordinator. He's a guy that I think is more than qualified to be a head coach in the National Football League, but he understands what he's got there, the unit that he has in the offensive line room. Take a look at a guy like Matt Nagy, who was a head coach of the year in Chicago. We won the NFC North with him. I had never done that before. Obviously, he was a great coach, but now he's back in Kansas City. So you look at the other side of the ball, Steve Spagnuolo, and the job that he's done, the thankless job that he's done as a defensive coordinator on a team lauded for being magical offensively. I just feel like it's a bunch of selfless guys who understand that if they put the team first, they can do anything. And you talked about situational awareness and their clutch factor. It's not just Patrick. It's every single guy on that team having been through these meetings day after day after day where they preach situational awareness. They teach you what to do. They almost teach you to lower your heart rate. It's like those Navy SEALs that have to untie themselves in 12-foot water with their feet and their arms bound. The more relaxed that you are, the sooner you'll be able to get to the surface. And that's kind of the mindset that these Chiefs have. They're never overwhelmed, and they're well prepared, and they sink to the level of their prep.
So why is that mindset and that will and that want and the desire, everything you just talked about, why is that so hard for bad franchises to find the people that can bring that mindset in?
Because more often than not, the light at the end of the tunnel in the NFL does happen to be a train, and you are going to die. But when you are on a team with a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, you know that you're never out of the fight. You know that you're just one uppercut away from putting this guy on the canvas, whoever that guy is across from you. And we've seen it with Josh Allen. We saw it in Baltimore last year against Lamar. We saw it against Buffalo last year. Time and time again, the guy just finds a way to get it done. And if you can do just enough to allow him to do his thing, man, oh man, great things happen.
How maddening does it have to be then for a team like the Buffalo Bills, a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, who, albeit the Bengals have gotten over on the Chiefs and about the only one to do it in the playoffs, but to feel like you've got a quarterback of that caliber and to still now, in the case of Buffalo, fall short 4 times in the postseason to these guys, what can that do to a team, that repeated reinforcement that your best is still falling short relative to these guys?
Yeah, it's demoralizing. I remember playing in Chicago, and we had to go play Aaron Rodgers twice a year. And no matter how good of a week of practice we had, no matter how physically we played at the line of scrimmage as offensive linemen, Aaron Rodgers was going to go out there. He was going to find Jordy Nelson on a deep cross or a deep out. Randall Cobb was going to be booty naked over the middle, and nobody's going to be guarding him. And Ty Montgomery's going to be back there wearing an 80 number. These guys on these teams, like Josh's and Lamar's team, find a way to step up. That's why they have such great seasons, because they always have faith. But I go back to what I said about Kansas City. It's both sides of the ball. It's Dave Tobe, the special teams coach, dialing up a beautiful return there in the AFC Championship game. It's 3 facets, 3 phases, but they have a superhero at quarterback. And regardless of if you also have a superhero, we have a super team. That's really the mindset there, and we are super prepared.
So when we look at Philly's side of this, I mean, they have superheroes and super teams too. How do they sort of find a way to focus through everybody else's failure?
Well, I just think that if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, you have to lean on your strength. And your strength is that offensive line. Your strength is the interior of that defensive front. Obviously, they're going to be missing Nakobe Dean, but Zach Bond's been fantastic. Vic Fangio, bend but don't break. They're going to make Patrick and this Chiefs offense be absolutely perfect, earn it the entirety of the way down the field. You saw the opening drive for the Commanders, 20 plays, 3 points. And Vic Fangio is pumping his fist over there because he knows, our tongues might be out on the defensive front, but I promise you those guys are tired too, and they only came away with 3 points. So for the Kansas City Chiefs, they need to be perfect. And the Philadelphia Eagles, they don't need to do anything spectacular because of how talented they are. And that's why I have this Eagles fatigue. They just seemingly keep getting better. I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Myles Garrett ended up on that roster next year, and I would just roll my eyes and be like, well, there goes Howie bringing in another Hall of Famer to play for this Eagles team. Let's see if the Chiefs can beat this version of the Eagles.
You mentioned guys that look like Hall of Famers on that D line. As someone that played along the interior of the offensive line, when you look and see Jalen Carter and him as the heartbeat of that group up front, what separates him from so many of his peers as a defensive tackle and the way he's elevated his game?
His change of direction is elite. His ability to extend you, once you get engaged, he can lock you out and leverage you different ways, almost like an elite two-gapper. I may be getting into the weeds here on technique, but if I'm playing against Jalen Carter, I'm trying to pull him into me because when he uses that length, he gets bodies on the ground. He's 320 pounds. He's just above 6'2", almost 6'3". He reminds me a lot of Ndamukong Suh, but has more tools in the bag in terms of explosive rushes, attacking edges. Sue would just line up. He would line up at that cock 3, and he would be like, I'm about to run right through you. And it's going to be 70 plays of that. Jalen Carter's got some creativity in there. And I think they got the extracurricular stuff out of the same bag there. A couple slaps across the face of a guard, a couple late shoves. And Philly loves that. They feed on that. And that's really what that defense has been about for a long time. Not dirty, but towing the line of a bit too much.
Wait, did we have a whole conversation and not mention the refs? Because now you mentioned slaps, and all I'm thinking is the refs are going to get involved and everybody's going to yell.
No, you know what? We're leaving the refs out of this conversation. This is about ball today here. That's why we brought Kyle Long in here. You guys could check him out, doing a phenomenal job over at CBS Sports. Commentator, now reformed offensive lineman, skinny, got the great golf swing here. It's the total package when you get Kyle Long in here. Brother, always appreciate the time, man. This is a blast. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, brother.
You too, Kyle. Really, one of the smoothest golf swings I've ever seen on anybody that size. It's alarming, Jason.
Yeah, I wouldn't know anything about a smooth golf swing, Mike. You know this. Like I'm allowed to drive the cart, and that's it. Like that's where it ends. I drive the cart, and then I just sit down and go get the actual golfers their alcohol.
It probably where you belong on that, but great stuff from Kyle. Just insight into the way that Kansas City team does business top to bottom and why they've become so hard to beat. So coming up next, we will try and figure out which of these other quarterbacks we mentioned actually has a chance to beat them. Next on GoJo and Golic. Thank you to Kyle Long for stopping by here again, doing a great job over at CBS Sports, covering the NFL there. And Jason, I've always said he is the archetype. Every bald-bearded white man really looks the same, and especially for me, Kyle Long is patient zero of the bald-bearded white men of a certain variety, that of which I consider myself a branch off the bald, white-bearded coaching tree of Kyle Long. So now you've seen it up close and personal. You get it, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, you guys would both make the same lineup if you were being brought in for questioning on an episode of Law and Order, but let's not get it twisted. Like, Kyle Long is over here just sort of just on the cusp of being a model. You're like the Wish version of Kyle. Like, hey, he couldn't quite get Kyle, so we got Gojo. Like, I think that's probably pretty fair.
We used to joke that the Golic family was just the Costco brand Longs. I think now it would be the Temu Longs is the parlance of our time, but either way, it continues to reign true if you go word for word, bar for bar. Awesome family, awesome guy. Glad he was around here. We got to talking about some of the elite quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, Fitz. I'm excited to talk about some of the quarterbacks that aren't. We'll get to AFC wildcard losers and questions facing them this offseason. But I was taken aback by this. There's so much conversation right now about the relationships with organizations and their quarterbacks. You've got the Jets and Aaron Glenn mulling their future with Aaron Rodgers potentially in a decision that sounds like it's going to be left to Aaron Glenn and that staff to go out there and exercise. And then you've got the recent departure of someone like Bobby Slowick in Houston, where the Texans had all the success a year ago. Bobby Slowick is what Liam Cohen ended up being this year, the hot young candidate that was supposed to go on and then become a head coach here in short order. And now that he's out of town, we're getting some interesting stories that have come up about the relationship between quarterback and coordinator. And Lance Zierlein of ESPN 97.5 down in Texas goes and on the radio the other day and recalls this story of CJ Stroud and Bobby Slowick going back to the draft process. Take a listen.
He comes into Houston. Bobby Slowick is trying to tell him some stuff, and CJ just says, "Oh yeah, I know that we call this, whatever, XY switch, whatever it would be at Ohio State." And apparently, maybe it happened a couple times, and Bobby Slowick just kind of jumped him, said, "I don't give a what you call it, Ohio State. That's college. This is pro football." And Bobby kind of got in his face about it, And CJ's not one to back down at all. And CJ, and I don't know if Bobby was testing him or I don't know what the deal was, but CJ jumped up and got back in his face. And it was very contentious. It had to be kind of broken up. And so when CJ went to his next draft meeting, and I talked to the team where CJ went, because I asked this team, "Hey, did you hear anything about this with CJ Stroud?" And they said, "Oh, we asked CJ how his last visit went," which was Houston. And he said, "Terrible."
That again from John and Lance on ESPN 97.5. Fitz, you hear that something, nothing, or everything as it pertains to the now fractured relationship between coordinator and quarterback.
It's something. I do think, and you were the one that told me years ago that when you were prepping for your draft process and you were getting ready for it, you got prepped for the question of what do you love other than football? And your answer was nothing, because you can't give people any clue that you have any other interest at the time, right? And I think of that often when we think about the draft process, because part of what teams are trying to do is egg somebody on. They're trying to see the worst of somebody, trying to get whatever emotions they can get out of them. I do think that there's some validity to, I don't love that process from Slowick, but if that's the way he works, I can see where he's trying to get under the quarterback's skin to see how he responds to conflict and confrontation and all of those things. That makes sense. He did come back, right? He chose not to put himself into some of these interview opportunities last year. He chose to come back. So there has to be some level of they found some common ground, but I don't know, Mike, like you and I have both in our careers in different places had to work with people in any business that were difficult. And I do think at some point that becomes exhausting for everybody involved in the process, no matter if you're making widgets or if you're in a football locker room. Like when you work with somebody exhausting, it might bring the best out of you for a minute, but for some people it does wear you out. So I do have to wonder, considering the fact that the Texans offense took a step back, considering the fact that they weren't as dominant, considering the fact that CJ was a little bit more human this year, you just have to wonder if you look at it and say, well, now the conflict, whatever is there, isn't worth the juice, isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah, and you wonder, the relationship clearly got to a certain point where you don't got to like everybody. You just need enough professional respect to be able to go out there and do the job. And as long as everyone's pulling the rope in the same direction, you can excuse away a lot of that, especially, like you said, in a draft process that is wrought with a bunch of strange tactics to try and challenge guys mentally to see how everyone responds in adversity. The combine is just one giant exercise in trying to beat you down to see how you respond when you are physically, emotionally, every level of exhausted possible, and then going through the most important job interview of your life. So I put some stock into that, Fitz, and it might explain how ready they were or how willing they were to part ways quickly, because with Houston, only they know the truth of how much Bobby Slowick was involved in the demise of that offense this year. Because from the outside looking in, we have a bunch of variables in the experience, right? You've got injuries at wide receiver in important spots and guys that you brought over. Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs both go down. Nico Collins spends a bunch of time on the bench. The offensive line had, I think, 11 different combinations that played at least 10 snaps last year. So you're constantly circulating those guys in because of injury or poor performance. There's a bunch of places that you could point for a team that still ultimately made the playoffs. Now, they got there. They were able to win a game even against the Los Angeles Chargers. Like, the results on paper look just like last year, even if we understand that that was not as good of a team as we saw in 2023 from the Houston Texans. And so it to me indicates that, all right, you know what? Maybe this wasn't a fractured relationship, but it may not have also been a strong enough relationship to where you worry about how is this going to affect my young quarterback going forward if we change the voice in his ear now and going into his third season in the NFL.
Isn't that something, too, that Tua has been so clear about? Like, and this comes back to something that I think everybody has to play the shoes on the other foot game for a second. We all respond to different types of coaching in life, different types of communication and relationships or coaching in business. Like, I personally, I respond best to really hard coaching. Like, I want somebody in any situation to tell me what I suck at and what I need to work at. That's just how I thrive. I don't need love language. I don't need a compliment sandwich, things like that. That's me. And so I'm actually kind of uncomfortable when people come in with the compliments. It doesn't bring out the best in me. That's me. I know several people that are very different and have worked with people that are different. Tua, again, I'll go back to, made it very clear that it got exhausting to him walking into the organization and hearing from the previous regime that he wasn't good enough, that he was never going to be a star in this league and all these things. Like, I do think that you can look at it at some point and say, okay, what do we need to do to get the best out of CJ? Because you've seen how good CJ Stroud can be. And if they look at it and say, man, if you're implementing a new offense, that means learning something new. That means all new terminology oftentimes. That means massive change. You have to, as an organization, believe that it's worth massive change, which means there had to be something to just the environment with Slowick. Because I don't think, even for the step back their offense took for the reasons you mentioned, I don't think that there was a fireable offense in the way they did business. That has to speak to what was going on behind the scenes and a communication style difference at the very least between some of the players and the coach. And I just have to wonder too, for all the Stephon Diggs obviously hurt for a lot of this year, but he's been somebody that's never held his mouth quietly to quarterbacks that he doesn't like. All of these things factor into the locker room environment. Clearly they felt they needed a different voice for that environment.
It is going to be interesting. This feels like at the blackjack table where someone makes a risky play, and so you wait to see at the start of the next hand, what's the card that comes out first that kind of informs, oh, hey, it wouldn't have mattered. Oh, hey, this would have gone. Like, what card comes out next, both for where Bobby Slowick lands towards the tail end of a hiring cycle that's seen a bunch of movement already, and then who ends up as the next coordinator for the Houston Texans? Because part of the other story that wasn't in the sound that we played there, but it was in the rest of that segment with Lance, was him talking about at Ohio State that there had been reports that CJ coming out only dealt with Ryan Day, that he's a guy that is such a bright football mind and didn't, want to hear from the coordinator who he didn't think was that smart at the time at Ohio State, which, again, I trust Lance. He's a great analyst. He does a phenomenal job with the draft. And so if he's saying it, I believe there's merit to it. But CJ Stroud, we saw in last offseason's tour, right? Bright guy, sees the game really well, can explain the game really well, does seem like someone that from the neck up is a quarterback's quarterback. And so bringing someone in with an aptitude that he can respect on a team that, again, is coached by a defensive head coach. DeMeco Ryans is on the other side of the ball when it comes to that. And so we always talk about D coordinators that become head coaches have to have and nail those offensive coordinator hires. With CJ especially, who seems to be a high aptitude guy, it's kind of like in school, Fitz, you've got to challenge bright minds. And I think with CJ, that's going to be some of the same thing in the way he sees the game. And so it's no surprise, Nick Caley, the Rams assistant coach who got interviewed by the Buccaneers, I think got interviewed by the Texans as well. Like, it seems like they're going to try and tap into that coaching tree that seems to have produced incredibly bright minds across the sport to see if they can find their guy to really gel that way with CJ.
Yeah, I also think your point on what's going to be asked to find a new offensive coordinator is an important one. Anytime you hire a defensive-minded head coach, remember, they're going to have to, in the modern NFL, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board repeatedly for offensive coordinators, because if they do well, they're getting head coaching jobs. And if they don't, they're getting fired, right? It is interesting to me for DeMeco. We just look at a couple of years ago, the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. They change coordinators. They make bad hires. The Eagles look like a dumpster fire. The Eagles get the right coordinators. They're back in the Super Bowl. Like, coordinator hiring. And we just talked to Kyle Long. He spent how much time talking about the coordinators, the position coaches. All of these things are such a huge part of how we should judge head coaches. This is truly a turning point moment for DeMeco. And additionally, because he's going to have to go in and nail this out. Like, there is no doubt that CJ Stroud has the ability to be a great quarterback in the NFL, right? Like, there's no question that they have their guy. When you unquestionably have your quarterback, that puts so much pressure on the rest of the coaching staff to maximize the quarterback. Now you're 2 years in and you're making this change, and you got to look at it like we all do, say, okay, you only got a couple years left on this rookie deal in a bad division, in a stacked conference. Like, it's just all of these things start to be bricks of pressure that will suddenly mount for DeMeco as well.
Yeah, and I think the advantage that DeMeco has, and it's one, if you use Todd Bowles as the other side of this conversation, another defensive head coach in Tampa Bay, their defense was the Achilles heel this year. The defense was the one where people were looking for answers. And anytime you're a coach at any level, right, wrong, or indifferent, when it comes down to the thin margins that are the ultimate judgment for your job, in most cases when there's not some glaring issue, people look and go, well, how about your side of the house? How about the side of the ball that you do influence more? And for DeMeco Ryans, at the very least, you can point to that Houston defense and still go, yeah, absolute ball of knives, raging bunch of badasses, insane talent at almost every level that went out and handled their business. You came off that playoff win against the Chargers going, that group is a weapon. That group is a problem. Offensively, I do think a lot of this just gets solved by health fits. Like, if they hit a stretch where they don't have to deal with a bunch of different offensive line combinations and their number one receivers on the field for the whole year, a coordinator upgrade might help some things in the interim, but I do think more of that was health than anything else. And if you had one stable group in front of CJ, like most of the good teams, when you look up at the end of the year and see in front of him all season, and Nico Collins at the very least is the bedrock of that passing game, I think we're talking a lot less about all of this.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, but that's one of the variables when we sit here today and we try and predict what the future is going to look like in the NFL. The one thing that we'll never have a grasp of is what health is going to look like. I loved your point earlier of 11 offensive line combinations. And we've talked about what the 20 something combinations that the Chiefs have used this year. Like, all of this it's just such a reminder that as much as we sit here and say, well, this is a given, we know this next year, this team is going to be great, or this team is going to suck. Games lost to starters by injury is one of those little nuggets that every year has such an impact to all of this. Like, it's funny to me, genuinely funny, that these weapons come back and they're healthy. Even if the offensive coordinator isn't as talented as Bobby Slowick, they might put up better numbers next year simply because they have better usage of the weapons that they have. So it's one of the interesting things. If you're Slowick a year ago, you could have been a head coach in the eyes of many, and you decided to take your name out of that cycle. And that worked for Ben Johnson. But by God, it didn't work for Bobby Slowick, and injuries are a huge part of why.
It is, but at the same time, we've seen good organizations. Philadelphia dealt with injuries to their starting offensive lineman in the NFC Championship game, made it work. The Kansas City Chiefs are starting Joe Thuney at left tackle going into the Super Bowl right now. And so building up the depth and having the ability to absorb those things, also the hallmark. That's why Kyle talked about, and it's so true, organizations are more than just one great player. It's that holistic approach from the top down is the reason why Philadelphia, why Kansas City are the two teams getting ready to duke it out on the mountaintop yet again as we get ready for a Super Bowl rematch from 2 years ago. Coming up next, we looked at the NFC teams gone in the wild card round. We'll look at the AFC wild card losers and figure out the big questions they've got to answer this offseason. Next on GoJo Golic. All right, so earlier, Fitz, we looked at the teams that were eliminated in the NFC wildcard round and asked the big questions facing those teams coming up this offseason. And the biggest one of that bunch, no surprise, was the Minnesota Vikings and how they handle the quarterback situation that they have going forward. You draft J.J. McCarthy in the first round, he gets hurt, and then Sam Darnold has the year of his career on a team that wins 14 games but ultimately craps the bed at the end, and how you negotiate that. I feel like now as we look at the eliminated AFC wildcard teams that include the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, Pittsburgh has a very similar dilemma at quarterback, but with far worse answers, Jason, than what's gone on in Minnesota. Like in Minnesota, if you bring back Sam Darnold, you bring back a quarterback that had the best season of his career with a roster that's going to be largely the same, I'm sure with some improvements even, and one of the best play callers in the NFL. In Pittsburgh, Jason, the answer of what do they do at quarterback, and I don't know if you disagree or not, doesn't really have any answers that, in my mind, make Steelers fans feel markedly better about their team going into 2025.
I believe that there are several teams, the Steelers are one of them, that are desperate for a quarterback. And unfortunately, when the entire offseason's done and when we're headed into next summer, you're going to realize that there simply wasn't any good option. And it doesn't bring me joy to say that. Like, I understand the Steelers, and I hear people say all the time, well, just go get a quarterback. Oh, okay, how? Like this free agent class, as we've talked about, doesn't have a guy that I believe is going to be a franchise saver in any possible way, right? So this draft, in my opinion, I don't even believe Cam or Shador are guys that are going to turn around and electrically save their franchises the way CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels have done the last 2 years. If you're the Steelers, this is that unfortunate moment where I know you need a quarterback. You know you need a quarterback. The whole league knows, the whole world knows you need a quarterback. The problem is, picked a bad year to need one because there just aren't going to be any available. Like, to me, unfortunately, like, Russ and Justin Fields are not viable options for starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And Russ and Justin Fields are better than most of the options that are out there. Like, I don't believe that there is an answer for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this comes back to something Pete Carroll said about the Raiders roster construction the other day. Got to build up. You got to build up everything else around them. Toughest job in sports. So let's make that job easier by building everything else. I think the only thing the Steelers can do is continue to build the rest of their roster and pray to God somehow they hit a flyer on a quarterback none of us are thinking of, or try and figure out quarterback in a full year.
The Steelers' first-round pick is 21st, so to your point, outside of the range most people estimate any of the viable quarterback options in this draft, although there are some people, my former head coach at Notre Dame, Charlie Weiss, stumping very much for Jackson Dart, who he thinks could be the Bo Nix of this class as a guy who's under talked about, but a veteran player who put up some good numbers. And Fitz, cap-wise, they'll have some money to spend here. It is a roster that's flawed in areas besides quarterback, but I think the same quarterbacks that we've talked about elsewhere, like could Sam Darnold be enticing? Could getting the remnants of Kirk Cousins, maybe a year removed from that Achilles injury, knowing that he's going to be the odd man out in Atlanta, could that be a place you go and shake up the bag? Because I'm with you. Build up the rest of your roster is generally good advice for most NFL teams. But at the very least for the Raiders, brand new head coach. Like, you get to say, hey, Pete Carroll is going to get an opportunity, knowing what he's walking into. Quite honestly, the way Antonio Pierce probably should have been given some leeway and wasn't because of the quarterback situation and the strength of that roster overall, at the very least, you can sell a more long-term vision. With Mike Tomlin, he's been here forever, and this has been a team that hasn't won a playoff game in forever, it feels like, relative to the Steelers' standards. And so you wonder if that fan base that already has had more angst around Mike Tomlin's job, I'm not saying he should be on the hot seat, I'm not saying they're going to fire him, but I do wonder how much longer you can sell it to, because Art Rooney, their owner, came out and said, hey, we want to sign Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, and probably not the other coming back next season. I'm wondering how long you can continue to sell, build up the rest of the roster, and hope when right in your own division, you've got two teams with quarterbacks that look like they're going to wear gold jackets someday soon.
Yeah, but the problem is, see, this is where Steelers fans have their angst going to the wrong place. Like, Mike Tomlin isn't the problem for the Steelers, no matter what's happened in the playoffs. The problem for the Steelers is they don't have a gold jacket quarterback. And if you go back and look at quarterbacks that have played in the Super Bowl over the course of just played in the Super Bowl, not even, but just the quarterbacks that are consistently in the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, right? We've all seen these Peyton Manning. Go back over the last 20 years and ask yourself, how many quarterbacks have made it, particularly from the AFC, that aren't epic? This is Joe Flacco is your one outlier, right? Like, the only way you're getting to the Super Bowl in the AFC now is if you have a future Hall of Famer quarterback like Lamar, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow all have a shot to be a future Hall of Famer. Patrick Mahomes, I think, is going to end up being the best of all time. I don't care if you put Jesus on the sidelines coaching the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you don't have a quarterback better than Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, or Jackson, you aren't going to win in the play. You're not going to win a Super Bowl, right? And so all of a sudden look at it and say, what quarterback available is better than any of those guys? The answer is none. So all you can do is just keep trying to win games the way you win games, which is with the head coach that makes the most out of the roster he's got.
Yeah, I mean, taking a long-term approach and saying, hey, let's find more weapons in the receiver room. Let's get younger in some spots on defense. All advice well served. I just wonder what the angst in town there is going to be like. Two teams that are set at quarterback fits, the Chargers and the Broncos, also going to be the subject of this conversation. Chargers, weird end of the season. They go out in a turnover-filled game that was atypical relative to the season that Justin Fields had been having there. Seems like a pretty clear question of, what is Harbaugh going to do this time around when faced with O-line or wide receiver? Last year, the clear choice was O-line. They draft Joe Alt high. They let Mike Williams and Keenan Allen go in free agency in the offseason. And so now this year, Fitz, do you think he dips in the well and finally goes and gets another weapon to complement Ladd McConkey?
I think he should. I think getting another weapon makes a lot of sense. But also, man, in Harbaugh, I trust when it comes comes to drafting fat guys. Like there is just something to me about, man, if you want to keep stacking onto the interior of that offensive line, I would have no problem with it if I'm the Chargers, right? Like this feels like one of those moments where they'll also get the benefit on both sides. Like if I'm the Chargers, I'm aggressively trying to make a move to get T. Higgins. I'm aggressively trying to make a move to get DK Metcalf. Like bring me a proven wide receiver, and then I can continue to use my draft equity to the offensive line. That makes a ton of sense to me. They're so far ahead of schedule. They need better weapons ahead of them that they can throw the football to. I get that, but man, also you know that he's going to run the football. You know he's going to want to be a physical head coach. I love going for, like, if your favorite team this year in the draft drafts a bunch of fat guys you've never heard of, throw the confetti in the air. It probably means you had a really good draft.
I do think, and I am the foremost one to beat the drum for the old Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase meme that came out ahead of that draft. I am always one where you want to start with quality beef and rare body types. At the same time, the Greg Roman experience is one that we know, and one thing is always clear is he's not going to scheme guys in the passing game open all that often, so you're going to have to be able to outdude people at some point there. Ladd showed a lot of promise there. Quentin Johnston had his best season as a pro, but still a lot of drops in bad spots. I'll be curious what they do there. And then the Broncos, Fitz, in the division that you know very well here. Bo Nix, I mean, they did the thing where they found the guy. Sean Payton was able to develop him and work around him and things. I think they've got a really strong foundation both defensively and in front of him here. It seems to be a lot of the same formula, which is you just need to add someone else that can go out there and threaten defense, likely at wide receiver, to go along and complement a quarterback that seems like, by all accounts, you talk to people around there, they believe they've found one of those guys that can be their quarterback for the next decade.
Well, and look, at this point, it's any offensive playmaker. I'd take a tight end. I'd take wide receivers. Anybody I can do to scare people a little bit more. I mean, Bo Nix was so much better than I expected he would be this year. I think that's a fair thing to say across the board. But also, the Broncos made so much more out of their talent than I expected they would be able to make. So, yeah, I think they'll be aggressive in trying to get playmakers around it. Now that it looks like they got their guy. What do you do when you got a young quarterback on a rookie contract? Go put everything around him you can to try and maximize that window. Yeah, Denver absolutely has everything they need to go out and win a bunch of games next year.
Yeah, I think that's a team that, Sean Payton, there were a lot of questions when he came back and took the job, having to shoulder the load of the Russell Wilson contract. That burden is only going to get easier going forward now on that front office and the way they can go out and acquire talent. And reaching in a draft where a lot of people weren't sure if Bo Nix was a true first rounder like that, especially now as we look out at the vast wasteland of this quarterback offseason, feels like one of the most prescient moves in a long, long time. Coming up next, we will tell you the most important lineup change heading into Super Bowl 59 next on GoJo and Golic. All right, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Watch us live here Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. That includes our YouTube channel, GoJo and Golic on YouTube. Go and hit the subscribe button and make sure that you're ready for all the good content we got coming your way, especially with Super Bowl week right around the corner. Our thanks to our great guest today, Jason Fitz, for filling in for my father today. You can catch him at Jason Fitz on Twitter, doing a great job over at Yahoo Sports, inside coverage, the College Football Power Hour, all great stuff that he is involved with over there. Also, thank you to Jess Smetana from the Dan Le Batard Show and Kyle Long from CBS Sports for both joining us during the show. If you missed any of that, check it out wherever you get our podcast or right here on YouTube as soon as we get done. Jason, let's get to this. We've talked about the NBA and the trade deadline stuff, but the WNBA offseason quickly starting to usurp, or at the very least stare eye to eye with its NBA counterpart, as we've had plenty of moves in recent weeks. Kelsey Plum in a major move recently that departs her from the Las Vegas Aces, and now another superstar on the way, Alyssa Thomas, former Connecticut Suns superstar and one of the best players in franchise history, now making her way to the Phoenix Mercury, who also at the same time are saying goodbye to Brittany Griner, longtime franchise stalwart, who signs a deal with the Atlanta Dream. So, Fitz, it's been an offseason with big names on the move for the WNBA, continuing to snowball all of this popularity that we've seen coming off the last few seasons.
Well, and what do we talk about all the time, especially with the WNBA expanding? We talk about all the time how many roster spots are open and how hard it is to actually get onto a roster in the W. Seeing some of these big names go, I mean, if you're the Sun, it's pretty shocking. I think Alyssa leaving is pretty shocking for most Sun fan because she's been such a huge part of that franchise up until this point. Also, she had to sign off on it, had to be a sign and trade. You just think about what this means. It's just movement right now. I think teams are trying to shuffle the deck to figure out how to get to that next step. Connecticut being one of them. They've been right at the doorstep of a championship so many times. At some point, you try to figure out what do we do to move forward. We'll see how that plays. But I love this. I love the fact that stars are moving everywhere. I love that the league's got all this movement. I love that NBA insiders are covered it like this. It's great. He's got us pumped for the season.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen really the New York Liberty and the Las Vegas Aces started the super team trends as those two teams have battled back and forth for the championship in recent years. But now Jewel Lloyd on the move there, the Las Vegas Aces getting her, who's been a bona fide stud with the Seattle Storm. Kelsey Plum heads out here to Los Angeles to pair with Cameron Brink, who's going to be set to come back from injury. And as we mentioned, now you get Alyssa Thomas on the move as well, heading to the Mercury. So plenty of big names changing places this offseason. We know Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever going to continue to be a huge headline there as well. So a lot of fun shuffling of the deck as we head into a new WNBA season coming up this summer. Fitz, let's get to that. This one piqued my interest as someone that's fresh off of mainlining the Graders and Cincinnati chili favorite Skyline combination in the ice cream world not too long ago. We know this is a show that gets hungry pretty often here. And for Super Bowl week, that is no exception. It was announced that Popeyes would be debuting their championship lineup menu for what they're bringing to New Orleans here. An interesting lineup that includes Reposado flavored concha roll chicken sandwich, a limited edition of their famous Popeyes chicken sandwich, spicy strawberry hibiscus flavored lemonade mocktail, and Reposado flavored Louisiana garlic wings. So Fitz, rest assured, I will be in the market for that. I am going to start spam tweeting the Popeyes folks. This feels like destiny as we all get ready to head down to the Big Easy.
Yeah, I love this that they said it's the Popeyes crunchy buttermilk breading topped with the Reposado lime slaw, spicy spread, barrel cured pickle. Oh my God, that's so perfectly described. That sounds delightful. I'm not going to have any of it because I'm eating clean, but I do love that chicken from Popeyes, so I'm in for you. I'm in all the way.
So from Graders and Skyline to Popeyes and Don Julio, there is something for everyone's taste around here. Apparently, this is going to be available January 31st in New York City, Miami, Kansas City, and Philadelphia to honor the Super Bowl representatives, but then also available in New Orleans from January 31st until February 9th. So going to be on the lookout for that if you are also someone that's making the trip down to New Orleans. I understand, Fitz, this is also a difficult value proposition because you're going to New Orleans, one of the best food cities on planet Earth and certainly in the country. There's so much interesting fare down there that's germane to the area. Would you really want to spend time? I would remind you that, Popeyes a Louisiana staple there. I actually went to Fitz. I was in Lafayette, Louisiana not too long ago, and there was a Popeyes down there that used to have a buffet available to it, which I thought was incredible, and I would give my right arm for at this point in time.
I mean, I grew up like I'm old man on the block here. I grew up with the Wendy's buffet. Oh, the Wendy's buffet was so good when I was a kid.
Wait, Wendy's had a buffet?
Wendy's had a buffet back in the day, and it was so good. Oh man, yeah. Like I'm telling you, Mike, you were just born a few years too late. Like the opportunity to go in and buffet your way through they had like a salad bar and then like chili at the end of it, like chicken stuff. Oh man, it was so good. So good. Wendy's buffet, undefeated. You should make sure you get the Popeyes, by the way, on the day that I'm coming, because I'm just coming on. I'm nominating myself on your set, because that way you get some for me, but then you get to eat it because I'm eating clean, and that way I can just smell it. I can just smell it with you.
Oh, you want to do the skinny guy thing where you're just getting a whiff of it, maybe chew a little bit of it and spit out and get the taste, but not actually have to ingest the calories. You're saving the calories for me.
Right. I'm letting you eat the majority of it. Just cut me off like a little tiny sliver. I'll take that little piece and it'd be good.
Man, I tell you, the job I have during the week of trying to eat well enough to justify all this, as you mentioned, Wendy's, and they got the Girl Scout cookie Frosty getting ready to come out here soon.
Thin Mint Frosties
God is giving
just,
me his strongest soldier, his toughest battles routinely. So this is another one that we're looking forward to. Fitz, while we're hungry, though, let's finish this off with the third. So this is an interesting one here. In college basketball, we've got a very interesting play in the Summit League right now. The Omaha Mavericks are crushing it right now. They are undefeated in conference play here. They are getting ready on Saturday to host the Denver Pioneers, and we have seen for them an interesting locker room celebration that's now gone viral. After wins, their head coach comes into the locker room and has been beating on garbage cans left and right. And so with that in mind, their plan to pack the Baxter Arena coming up this weekend will be distributing up to 5 gallons of popcorn for each fan. There's a promotion on Saturday where fans are allowed to bring their own 5-gallon or smaller trash can to the arena to be filled with the 1908 concession at the 1908 concession stand for $5 with popcorn. You can bring up to a 5-gallon trash can to the arena to celebrate one of the most unique locker room post-game celebrations in sports. How does 5 gallons of popcorn sound to you in your health journey, Fitz?
Unbelievable. Like, look, I've got a friend that she loves to go to the movie theater, not to the movies, just walks into the movie theater, buys movie popcorn, takes it home, right? Like, popcorn is a delight. It is an American treasure. A 5-gallon bucket of it. I think the real move here, Mike, is to go get it and then make sure that you get it early in the game so you can eat the 5 gallons during the game. And then late in the game, go get another 5-gallon fill on it, take it out with you for the night. 10 gallons of popcorn in a day. That feels right. Like, that feels like God. That feels like God's on our side.
I would say God is inside this popcorn garbage can here. The tradition goes back to in December. The team was struggling here, and so Mavericks associate head coach Keon Brown had a spur-of-the-moment idea ahead of their clash with Cal Poly. They beat the Mustangs for the first time in 2 weeks, and so they went into the locker room where he just lets loose, beats this garbage can with a chair, all this different stuff to get the boys fired up. It's a reminder, Fitz, that especially sports like basketball, baseball, hockey with these long seasons, you got to find something to latch onto. It's the reason last year in baseball, we had a team throwing around a thing of unopened raw meat in the dugout for a little while. You got to find anything to do. And now the folks in Omaha are the beneficiary of this, because that much popcorn, Fits, as someone that used to hug the popcorn machine at CJ's Pub tightly in college, that can go a long way when you've had a few pops in an environment like a sporting event here. Great stuff by them. You got to take advantage. You're a fool not to take advantage of this for the reasons that you mentioned.
I think that you, being the food connoisseur that you are, you should have a popcorn machine in New Orleans for all of us, and everybody that comes on set gets to fill the bucket, and then we can all trash the bucket after we do our hit. Like, we hang out with you, then we trash the bucket. I'm helping you here. Like, this is content galore.
No buckets. It's a garbage can. We have to honor the process here and make it there's no getting out of this for someone's sake of cleanliness or their class here. If you're going to do it and come to the GoJo and Golic set at Radio Row at the Super Bowl, you're going to have to eat your popcorn out of the garbage can with the rest of us here. If that's not a reason to download, subscribe, rate, and review the show, I don't know what is. Leave it a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. We'll talk to all you guys tomorrow.